The biggest problem which the humanity is facing at the present times is the accelerated pace of global warming and the consequential climate change which is taking place in the planet Earth. And the number one reason behind such global warming and the climate change is the dominant and persistent usage of the fossil fuels for the generation of energy. For the single reason that fossil fuels releases tremendous amounts of greenhouse gases emissions, which results into further warming of the global atmosphere, which results into catastrophic and extreme weather events like the flash floods that we witnessed in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, or the increasing episodes of critical droughts that were experienced in the semi-arid regions of our country. Hello viewers, my name is Ritayan, and today we are going to discuss a very important concept which lies at the center of the entire issue of climate change, which is being used by the global community to tackle the hydra-headed figure of the issues which is being posed by the climate change. And that topic or the concept is known as the green energy transition. Now, before we go on and discuss what do we actually mean by green energy transition, first of all, let me give you a brief overview of what this lecture entails. So, we'll try to start the discussion with what do we actually mean by energy transition and what makes this energy transition to be labeled as green. And here then we will try to discuss that what are the driving factors which is pushing the global community to adopt more and more such measures which will put the global community onto the transition of green energy. And then we will try to come to our country of India. And here we will try to see that okay, what has been the emission landscape and the energy generation landscape of our country. And then we will try to see that okay, based on the emission landscape of our country, what are the role which is being played by the government so as to put our country into the path of green energy transition. Now, when we are done with that, we will also try to analyze that although the government is doing a great job, it must be facing certain hurdles like problems in putting India onto a green energy transition pathway. And then we'll try to end the discussion by asking us further broader questions that even though India will be able to transit to a more green energy paradigm, will it be fair enough or will it be inclusive enough? So these are the broader aspects or perspectives that we are going to discuss today. Now let us start with the core thing, which is what is energy transition and how we can make the energy transition to be green. Now, as we know that any kind of developmental activity will require significant amount of energy. And what kind of source of energy any country is using will result into the categorization of whether the energy that any country is using is green or not. So for example, 10 years back, the dominant source of energy or power generation for our country was coal or the fossil fuels. Now, since we know that if we will try to burn the coal for the generation of the energy, it will result into generation of more and more greenhouse gases emissions, which will further exacerbate the problem of climate change. And after various discussions at the global forums, whether be it UNFCCC or UNDP, the global community came to the point that we need to phase out the usage of fossil fuels in the way we generate our energy, and we need to adopt more and more such sources of energy which are more renewable in nature, whose carbon footprint is less. And that is what we know as the energy transition, which is nothing but the structural change in which how a country is producing energy, storing the energy and consuming the energy. So the overall idea of the energy transition is how to shift the way a country produces the energy or stores the energy or consumes the energy from the fossil to non-fossil sources of the energy. And as we try to increase the composition of the non-fossil fuel sources, it will lead to more and more green energy transition of the entire economy. And what is this non-fossil fuel sources? It can be the wind energy, it can be the solar energy. Apart from it, there are hydro energy as well, or the nuclear energy, and lastly the biomass or the biogas, which is generated by the decomposition of the biomass which is present over there. So these are the core tenets which is associated with the concept of green energy transition. But definitely there had been certain driving factors which has pushed the global community to adopt such green energy transition practices. So what are those driving factors? So the driving factors can be broadly classified into three elements. The first is the environmental push factors, then the economic push factors, and also there are certain international commitments which India has to oblige to. Now what do we mean by environmental factors? So as we know that the global overall environment is warming up at a very accelerated pace, and the UNFCCC under the Paris Agreement has tried to limit the global warming by the end of this century to 2 degrees Celsius, and they have to strive to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And it is India's moral obligation as well to tackle the issues of climate change, because if India's dominant source of energy remains the fossil fuel, it will result into more and more emission of the greenhouse gases emissions, which will further exacerbate the problems of climate change that India is already experiencing. Apart from it, one of the major ills associated with the burning of fossil fuels is the air pollution which India is experiencing. Now it is not a fiction, and it is absolutely a fact that majority of the Indian cities are facing chronic air pollution. Why? Because of the total dependency on the fossil fuels for energy generation and for the transportation as well. So because of these two elements, India is striving to move towards the usage of non-fossil fuel sources. The second is the economic dimension. Now you will be surprised to know that energy security is one of the core driving factors for India to adopt green energy transition. Why? That 85% of the crude oil demand of our country is met through imports, and India is trying to import crude oil from various sources, whether be it US, whether be it Iran or Middle East or Russia. And as you are well aware that recently the Trump administration slapped almost 50% tariff on the Indian exports to the United States of America. Why? Because the Trump administration felt that India is trying to purchase cheap Russian oil, and that USA did not like it. And ultimately, because we are not secure in the way that we are trying to produce our own crude oil, we are compromising on our strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy means that it is the ability of a nation state to take decisions for their own national interest without considering much of the external influence. And that is what India is trying to compromise, because we are not energy sufficient. We are importing 85% of our crude oil reserves. And the third important driving factor is the international commitments which the India has made. And recently in the year of 2021, in the COP26 of UNFCCC, Pradhan Mantri Modi proposed a Panchamrit Goals, which ultimately crystallized into the Nationally Determined Contribution 2.0. Now let us try to see what are those proposed goals in the COP26 of which was held at Glasgow, United Kingdom. So since we know that Government of India is trying to make a lot of significant strides so as to decarbonize the overall Indian economy and to increase the share of renewable energy and low carbon emission sources more and more. Now in pursuance of those goals only, what our Honorable Prime Minister did at the COP26 which was held at Glasgow, that he proposed 5 important goals which the India will try to achieve so that ultimately we will be able to transit into the green energy transition pathway. Now the first important goal which was put forward by our Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji was to achieve the net zero by the year of 2070. That by the time we reach 2070, the overall emission and the overall sink of the GHGs or the greenhouse gases emissions should be equal to each other. The second is that by the year of 2030, the overall installed capacity of the renewable energy should reach to the degree of 500 gigawatt. The third important goal which was there of the Panchamrit was the emission reduction of 1 billion ton of CO2 by the year of 2030. The fourth important goal was to reduce the emission intensity of our GDP by 45% by the year of 2030. And lastly, to achieve the 50% of the cumulative electricity production by renewable energy itself. So these are extremely ambitious goals which have been put forward by our Honorable Prime Minister, and it has made a mark in the global community that India is extremely serious when it comes down to the environmental conservation and environmental justice. And ultimately what happened is that these Panchamrit goals, it crystallized into the nationally Determined Contributions 2.0, and this NDC is nothing but a legal obligation for any signing party of the Paris Agreement that they have to communicate their goals that they are going to achieve by the end of 2030. And because of this, the global community, they hold India in high regard, because the degree of goals which India has provided, it's very astounding and it's very significant. Now let us try to see that since India has provided a Panchamrit goal and NDC 2.0 as well, what is the emission landscape in our country? From where does the entire emission is coming? And through the proper understanding of the emission landscape only, we will be able to better design our energy systems, so as to we should be able to know that, okay, in which sectors do we need to deploy more and more renewable energy. Now if you'll see this pie chart, it is very evident from this pie chart that of the total emissions, which comprises of almost 4.2 gigatons of CO2, of the total emissions, almost 75.66% of the greenhouse gases is coming from the energy sector, hardly 13% is coming from the agricultural sector, 8% is coming from the industrial processes sector, and 2.5% is coming from the waste sector. So it is very clear and evident that out of the total unit of greenhouse gases which our country is emitting, the dominant or the mega share is taken care of by the energy sector. Now let us try to further break it down. Let us try to zoom this energy sector into this component overall over here. So this diagram, it comprises of the breakdown of the entire energy sector and its greenhouse gases emissions. And you will be surprised to know that out of the total energy sector, the 60% of the greenhouse gases emissions which are done by the energy sector are being contributed by the sector of electricity production. Apart from it, there are certain manufacturing and construction activities and the transport sectors as well. Now as we know that our transport sector, which is primarily road driven, is heavily dependent on the crude oil, which is the petrol and the diesel. And right now the government is also trying to make certain efforts so as to decarbonize the transport sector as well, by increasing the capacity and the expansion of electric vehicles in our country, by bringing in more and more schemes like FAME or FAME 2.0, so as to bolster the ecosystem, which results into output of more electric vehicles in our country. However, coming down to this core aspect over here itself, that as we know that out of the energy sector, electricity production itself leads to 65% of the greenhouse gases emissions from the energy sector. And what we need to understand over here is that from where are we trying to generate the electricity, that it is leading to so much amount of greenhouse gases emissions. And this will be able to understand if we try to see the energy mix of our country. Now these pie charts have been taken from the dashboard of Central Electricity Authority, which has been developed in coordination with the Niti Aayog as well, and they try to provide very beautiful live pie charts with respect to the compositional energy mix of our country. Now if you'll try to see the first pie chart at the left side, what this pie chart is showing is the source wise electricity installed capacity. So you will be surprised to know, and India has achieved a significant milestone in this regard, that India, out of the total installed capacity, almost 50% now is coming from the renewable energy sources. Now if we have to take it 10 years back, hardly 10 years back, in 2014 it was 75% of the installed capacity was coming from the coal or the fossil fuel sources. But in 2025, while we are recording this video, it is very clearly visible in the graph as well, that almost 45.52% is coming from the coal. Apart from it, 4.23 is coming from oil and gas, which comprises of almost 50%. So the rest 50% is coming from the renewable energy sources. However, one very important pattern I would like to show you over here is that the right hand side pie chart is showing the final electricity generation which has been done. So as we have seen that fossil fuel sources comprises of 50% of the installed capacity. However, from this graph itself, it is showing that almost 70% of the electricity which is generated in our country is coming from fossil fuel sources. Now it shows a greater degree of mismatch, which means that despite having 50% of the fossil fuel, we are generating 70% of the electricity by fossil fuel. Why? Because the nature of renewable energy sources are intermittent. Not every day is as sunny and not every day is as windy. So if there is cloud and if there are monsoons or if the wind is not blowing that day, so the solar and the wind energy plants will not function in their optimum capacity, and that is why there is a greater degree of intermittency in the output of those renewable energy plants. And by the understanding of these things, what we need to understand is that what government is trying to do over here is that they are trying to, in the long term, they are trying to shrink the composition of the coal in the overall energy mix, and they are trying to increase the composition of solar, wind, nuclear, hydropowers in the overall pie chart, so that one day will come where if we have to draw the pie chart, it will be hardly 30% which will be generated by coal and rest will be generated by the renewable energy. And this goal is being espoused by the country that by 2030 we will be able to achieve almost 35% of installed capacity will be through by coal and rest 65 will be by the renewable energy. Now coming to the what trajectory has been there for the India's energy transition. This is what we need to note over here. So since we already know that India has significantly expanded its capacity for the renewable energy. To give you a context, in the year of 2014, the entire renewable energy installed capacity was hardly 65 gigawatt, and by the time of 2025 the same renewable energy installed capacity, as we noted, is almost 245 gigawatts, which means that we have almost jumped more than 3 times the installed capacity in the last only 10 years. And in the next 5 years also, according to the Panchamrit Goals, we want to take it to 500 gigawatts, again a 2-time jump, which means that Indian government is extremely sincere and solemn with respect to the capacity expansion of solar, wind, nuclear and other kinds of renewable energy sources. And by this capacity expansion, according to the International Renewable Agency, what it has noted that India has become the 4th largest country in the world with respect to the installed renewable energy capacity. To break it down further, India is the 4th largest country with respect to the energy production through wind and 3rd largest country with respect to the energy production through the solar panel mode. Now, ultimately we also need to note a very important tool which has been developed by the World Economic Forum, which is a think tank, and it had developed a tool which goes by the name of Energy Transition Index. And what does this Energy Transition Index actually does is that it monitors, records and tries to plot the trajectory of various countries with respect to what kind of energy transition that they are going through, and based on that it releases ranking annually. So you will be surprised to know that India in the year of 24 it was at the 63rd rank, and in 2025, although unfortunately its rank came down to 71st. The Energy Transition Index, which was published by the World Economic Forum, it noted that although India has provided a significant fillip or push for the expansion of renewable energy capacity, however there are certain issues with respect to the equity, grid stability and with respect to the import dependency of India on other countries of the world for important critical elements, whether be it the solar cells or the solar photovoltaic modules, or the, as we have already noted, that India is importing almost 85% of its domestic crude oil demand from other countries, and that is why it saw a dip in the rank of Energy Transition Index. Now, India has gone a significant mile with respect to taking its energy into a low carbon pathway, and now let us try to see that what the government has done over the years which has shown such remarkable results on the ground. So the governmental intervention has 2 major objectives. First of all, the first objective is to reduce the risk which is there, imminent risk which is there in the renewable energy sector, and secondly it wants to increase the level of investment by the private players, so that the compounding effect of these 2 objectives is that the overall capacity of renewable energy in our country should increase. And in the pursuit of this capacity, what the government has done is that it has tried to twist important levers, and these levers are nothing but 4 important levers which the government has used. Firstly, the policy levers. Secondly, by providing appropriate financial tools and interventions. Third, by providing and investing important R&D in certain technologies, and lastly by implementing certain schemes which provide benefits not only to the producers of the renewable energy but also to the consumers of the renewable energy. So now let us try to analyze them one by one. So what we need to understand over here is that the primary tool which the government is using is to create a conducive environment for the entire renewable energy sector. And how it can do that? It can do it only through the important policy ecosystem which it can manufacture. And the important policy tool which the government of India has used is the LT-LEDs. LT-LEDs is a short form for long-term low emission development strategy. So any party who is a member to the Paris Agreement of 2021, under the Article 24 of Paris Agreement, it mandates that signing party to communicate to the UNFCCC their long-term low emission development strategy, which will delineate all the efforts which a country is taking to put their economy into the low carbon pathway. So in the pursuit of that legal obligation, government has communicated their LT-LEDs to the UNFCCC. Apart from it, the government of India has also provided for renewable purchase obligations. Now it is a very important legal tool that we need to understand, which provides that any renewable energy producer, they will have very easy and accessible access to selling their power. So under renewable purchase obligations, what happens is that any DISCOM who is going to procure the power, they are legally mandated and bound to purchase stipulated or defined amount of power from the renewable energy producers. Now what it will do for the renewable energy producer is that it will de-risk their overall investment, so that they are assured that whatever power they are producing, it is definitely going to be get sold into the grid. Apart from it, the transmission charges have been waived off for the renewable energy producers. So as soon as any power producer, if they are fossil fuel based, they want to transmit their power from one state to another state, they have to pay a huge degree of taxes on the interstate transmission charges. And what the government has done to promote more and more adoption of renewable energy, that they have waived off this interstate transmission charges for the power producers who are producing power from renewable energy. And apart from it, they have also provided a very important status of must run status. So Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, under its grid code, it provides this must run status to the power plants which are run by the renewable energy. And this must run status, it simply implies that the power which is generated by the renewable energy sources has to get evacuated to the power grid of our country, so that they should be always available to be sold to the prospective buyers. That is the core agenda behind providing must run status. Now with respect to coming to the financial incentives which the government has provided, so government of India is providing accelerated allocations to the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. And to quote this year's budget itself, the government has allocated almost 26,000 crores rupees for the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, so that they should be able to implement and commission various projects of solar, wind, biomass, nuclear, etc. Apart from it, it has also allowed for 100% FDI in the solar sector, and also the regulatory bodies in the financial sector, which is the Reserve Bank of India and the SEBI, which is the Securities and Exchange Board of India, they have launched frameworks for the issuance of green bonds, so that more and more people would be able to generate more finances out of the capital market by issuance of green bonds. In the realm of technology, government is utilizing its various research and development and scientific agencies in the development of smart grid, carbon capture, utilization, storage technologies, battery energy storage systems, and sustainable aviation fuels, because these are the emerging technologies, and India, if they have to reduce their import dependency, we need to leapfrog in such critical technology sectors. And lastly, the government of India is also implementing certain very important schemes as well, so as to promote the domestic manufacturing of solar PV modules and reduce the import dependency, so that we should not be able to import such solar PV modules from China. Government is implementing the production linked incentive scheme for the domestic manufacturing of high-end solar PV modules. Also, it is also providing PM Kusum scheme, which provides solar pumps for the agricultural sector. Similarly, the government of India is also subsidizing people, and they want to promote rooftop solar panels so that government is providing subsidies. And lastly, government is also to decarbonize the transport sector. They are trying to blend the ethanol with petrol. They are trying to blend diesel with biodiesel so that the overall greenhouse gases emissions from the transport sector should reduce. Now, these are the overall milieu in which the government is trying to alter the renewable energy ecosystem. But is the government is facing a very clean ride on this path? So the answer is absolutely no. Government is also facing a great degree of hurdles with respect to putting India onto a low carbon pathway. And the number one hurdle which the government is facing is land acquisition. Now, as we know that India is a very highly populous country and its population density is also extremely high. The degree of wastelands or such grasslands are also very limited. And based on that, if we need to create more infrastructure for renewable energy, it will take, or it is highly contingent on the land which is available. And as we know that land is a state subject, so it will further involve a greater degree of bureaucratic hurdles for various private parties who wants to invest in the renewable energy sector. And according to Council of Energy, Environment and Water, which is a very premier think tank in the domain of climate change, it suggests that for India to achieve the Panchamrit goal of 500 gigawatt of energy from the renewable energy, they would be needing almost 0.3 million hectares of the land, and definitely it is going to be a very stark problem in front of the government. The second is associated with finance. Now, as we know that, if you remember the first Panchamrit goal, that is to achieve the net zero by 2070. Now, to achieve the net zero by 2070, International Energy Agency, according to its own estimates, it suggests that it will require almost $10.1 trillion. And can you imagine a developing country like India, which has its own developmental imperatives, when it has to provide for various kind of agrarian distress, various kind of problems like unemployment, structural problems with respect to our economy. Now, in that context, it also has to provide for 10.1 trillion, because the overall upfront cost for the renewable energy infrastructure and the cost associated with the new emerging technologies like the green hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, sustainable aviation fuel, it will require a lot of cost, and this will be a very important problem for the government of our country. The third is the output mismatch. As we have noted in the previous pie chart that we had analyzed as well, that despite having 50% of the installed capacity under coal or under the fossil fuel, right now the fossil fuel is almost contributing to 70% of the electricity which is generated. Why it is happening? Because of the intermittent nature of the solar and the wind energy, and this is definitely going to be a very important problem for the government of our country, so as to put our country into the low carbon pathway, or to put our country into a path of green energy transition. Why? Because of the inherent nature of the solar and the wind energy, and because of their intermittent nature, it will always be a very important situation for our country to pitch in for coal, so that the coal will be able to provide more power when the solar and wind power are not able to produce enough energy. The fourth important hurdle which the government of India will face in the coming years is that almost 4 million people are directly involved in the fossil fuel economy, that they are directly employed under the fossil fuel economy, and almost 4 million more people are indirectly involved in the fossil fuel economy. And if India wants to shift from the usage of fossil fuels to new and renewable energy, what it will entail is that it will entail a massive structural unemployment which might result out of that green energy transition, because a lot of people will face unemployment because those sectors will get shrunk into a very smaller sectors. And lastly is the energy poverty which India is facing. Now, certain estimates suggest that by the year of 2047, our energy demand will surge by almost 2.5 to 3 times. In the present scenario also, our per capita energy consumption is very low as compared to our developing and developed peers. Now, in this situation, the challenge in front of our government is twofold. First of all, they have to increase the per capita energy consumption, and secondly, they have to ensure that the per capita energy consumption increase which has to take place, it should be green as well, and that will entail more finance for the government to actually fructify it. So the path ahead for the government is not going to be a rosy ride. Although the government of India has prove to be monumental in transitioning India's economy into a more green energy pathway, but definitely they are going to face more problems in the coming times. Now, what further question that we need to ask is that, is green energy transition enough, or do we need just energy transition? And this is where I would need your comments and suggestions as well in the comment box. However, I'll give you a brief element of this concept as well. That since we have noted that we need to move out of the fossil fuel sector and we need to increase the composition of the renewable energy. So definitely the people who are employed in the coal sector, the people who are employed in the refineries, which is the crude oil sector, they might lose their jobs in the coming times as well, because more number of jobs are getting created into the, say, electric vehicle sector or the solar PV module manufacturing sector. So what the government has to do is that, since we are going through a structural shift in how we produce energy, we should also take care of the people who are employed in those sectors as well. So to make our energy transition more fair, inclusive and sustainable, so that it can be a just transition. And I would like your comments as well over here, so that what more measures can the government should take so as to make the green energy transition which India is making to be more just in nature. Now this was all about this particular topic. Now we would also want your support in helping us to find more topics so that we can make such instructive videos for you. My name is Ritayan Guha, signing off. Like, share and subscribe. Thank you.